Good evening, all, and welcome. Happy New Year. Let's start the year off right with some terrifying paranormal stories. Be sure to download our app for a huge collection of even more stories. Link in the description, but for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was a kid, I must have been between 10 or 12 or something. I had this guy who lived in my neighborhood who was 4 years my senior. We used to play together, and he would tell us these stories about how he used to see fire in certain areas of his house, and the visuals stopped when his grandfather got some holy rituals done in the house. Back then, I never believed him. A few years later, we're all grown up, and Patrick's mum accidentally caught fire in the kitchen. Patrick's elder brother tried to save her and got his hands burnt in the process. No one knows how it happened. And after being in the hospital for 2 to 3 days, she succumbed to her injuries. And at the time, we didn't have those childhood stories in our recollection. And then later that year, we're all friends, and we're just having a late night walk and talking about ghost stories, just joking around trying to scare each other. And Patrick was all quiet and listening. All of a sudden, he says, "Do you remember I told you I used to see fires in my house? See how my mum died?" That was creepy. In the same neighborhood, there is another friend of mine, Tom. Tom's dad was an alcoholic, and you can imagine all the bad things that alcoholism comes with to exist in Tom's life. They were extremely poor. Side note, he's doing great now because he's super dedicated and very humble. But anyway, back then, his dad got diagnosed with tuberculosis. He was hospitalized and things were bad. Now in the apartment below Tom's apartment, there lived a family who had this mentally challenged man who was in his late 40s or early 50s. He wasn't married and rarely left the house. One morning at around 5 a.m., while Tom's father was hospitalized, this old man knocked on Tom's door. Tom opened it groggily, and the man said, "Why aren't you ready yet? Go get ready and visit your dad for the last time." That was the day Tom's father died in the hospital, and he later told me about the incident. Both these stories are so convincing because I know these guys, and I really don't think they would lie about something as devastating as losing a parent. My dad died this past December. We were close, and I am still devastated. Dad was an Air Force officer, avid birdwatcher, practical joker, and an amazing cook. He also put black pepper on damn near everything. I went to his farm to hold down there and take care of his dogs and chickens until they could be rehomed. While I was there, my stepbrother came to visit to keep me company for a day, and we lit a fire in the backyard fire pit and cracked a few beers. Half-hour into our conversation, a bald eagle buzzed us. This was literally less than 5 feet over our heads. It wasn't going after prey and had no reason to fly that low other than to get a good look at us and let us know it was there. There's no doubt in my mind that was my dad. After my stepbrother left, I was walking in the house. There's a back door that leads straight into the kitchen, with a spice rack next to it. As I'm opening the door, a single container of black pepper flies off the shelf and lands about 4 feet away. There were a bunch of other spices on the shelf that didn't get moved, just the black pepper. I'm convinced that was also Dad. I immediately pour a little bourbon and another and another. That night, I got roaringly drunk. I cried my eyes out, howled at the moon, and screamed in the heavens. Everything I ever wanted to say to my dad, but I didn't get a chance to. I walked into the kitchen the next morning to find one of the mouse traps up on one edge. There's no way that happened naturally. I know my dad heard me, wherever he is. During the clean-out, I pulled my dad's wind-up clock off the wall. This was a clock that my dad had built the casing for, but hadn't worked in several years since my stepmother died. Dad, me, and my brother had all taken a crack at fixing it to no avail. It was a pretty clock, but if it didn't run, it was going to be given to charity. I pulled it off the wall and set it on the front porch, and lo and behold, it starts ticking. My wife's mouth fell open, and that both sent shivers down our spines. It was Dad telling me, "Don't give the clock away," and it now hangs in my house. And finally, after the funeral 6 months after his passing, we returned to the farm to bury his ashes. While packing up and about to leave the following morning, a rooster shows up. It was the exact breed my dad had. It came walking along the street, turned to the center of the long driveway, and walked straight up to the house. There's a section of the front yard where Dad had buried his past dogs. The rooster walks straight up to the gravesite, pecks around for a minute, looks at me, clucks, then turns, walks out the gate and into the cornfield. Dad was the only person within 5 miles that had that breed of chicken, New Hampshire Red. I also think that was my dad coming to say hello. Once upon a time, I lived on South Beach, Miami, and worked at a local alternative clothing store right on the main strip. One day in the middle of summer, I was at work with just the store owner with me there. It was slow season and the customers were scarce. So she made herself busy dressing mannequins on one side of the store, while I sat folding shirts behind a display case on the other side. It was boring to say the least, but at one point the owner interrupted me to ask if I had seen her kids come through. They lived upstairs, so this would not have been unusual. However, I had not, and told her so. When I asked why, she said she could have sworn she heard some kids laughing and talking somewhere in the store, but I hadn't heard a damn thing. So she went back to her task, obviously confused. I resumed work folding the clothes and thought nothing more of it. All was quiet and completely unremarkable for the next 10 or so minutes, until a sudden movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. I then turned to look just in time to see my bottle of vitamin water launch itself from where it was sitting on top of the display case, slam into the wall 5 feet behind, and spill all over the floor. No joke. That bottle flew into the wall like it had been struck by a baseball bat hard enough to get a home run. I say that I was perplexed, and that's an understatement. I sat there frozen and stared at the mess as I struggled to comprehend what and how it happened. I would have been able to see someone if they'd have thrown it, and no one was around, not a soul, but it wasn't physically possible, right? My brain felt like it was going to short circuit. A few moments later, I was still staring stupidly at the mess when the owner walked up to check on me. "Is everything all right?" she asked when she saw what happened. I didn't know what to say, but I think I mumbled something about the bottle getting knocked off the counter, and I told her I would clean it up right away. Satisfied but still confused, she shrugged and walked away. Now this is where it gets really wild. If you've ever seen a vitamin water cap before, you know it's made of quite hard, thick plastic that is nearly impossible to break without some sort of tool. So whatever quantum force decided to make an example out of my bottle that day must have been especially powerful, because the impact it had made against the wall split the cap clean through the center, sending both pieces flying in opposite directions before they hit the floor. I'm just glad I wasn't in the way. So take it from me, poltergeists don't mess around. About 20 years ago, I went to visit a relative who had just moved to our town. She invited me into her kitchen for tea. We sat at a little table in the corner, but at one point she left the room to go and get something. I don't remember what. I glanced over to the other side of the kitchen and saw a man hanging by the neck over the stove from one of those plant hanger hooks. Moments later, she returned and just said, Not sure how you're going to feel about this, but I just saw a man hanging by the neck over there," and pointed to the stove. She asked, "What did he look like?" "He had dirty blonde hair and mustache and wore a brown flannel shirt." She went white. After a minute of her just staring at me, she said, "No one out here knows this, but the reason we moved from New York was because our roommate hung himself in our basement, and he looked like the man you just described." I also have another story. Early morning Thanksgiving 6 years ago, I was taking the turkey into a large roasting pan to my cousin's house so that she could cook it in her oven, because I had other baking to do and they had 2 ovens. Their house was and is at least 100 years old. When you enter the house through the front door, you can either go straight through a hallway to the kitchen or turn right to go into the living room. Off of the hallway to the kitchen there is a small bathroom with a door that opens out into the hallway. So my cousin's husband opens the front door and instead of taking the roasting pan from me, hurries to the hallway to shut the bathroom door that someone had left open. He steps into the bathroom and pulls the door closed so that I could make it through to the kitchen. As he's in the bathroom and I'm carrying an even heavier roasting pan, I feel an enormous amount of energy rush through my body, from behind me, through the front of me. And then I saw a very large man with dark, salt and pepper hair stomp away from me and go through the swinging door to the side dining room. I hurried to set the roasting pan down, and then went to the still swinging door to look in the dining room to see what the hell just happened. When I pushed the door open and looked in the dining room, there was dead silence and I was stunned. I turned back around and my cousin's husband was walking into the kitchen and said, "Did you see that?" His face was deadly serious. All he said was, "I don't want to talk about it." And they moved to another house a year or so later. My final story goes like this. I had come home from work for lunch. It's a 5-minute drive, and afterwards I was driving back to work but had to take a different route than usual, right past a very large and beautiful cemetery. The street is divided, one with large trees in the median, so I pulled out and turned left. There wasn't any traffic. It was a beautiful sunny day, and I've driven down that road about 10 yards, no traffic, no parked cars, when I looked out the passenger window and suddenly see a young man sitting there on the curb. He's wearing long jean shorts, a red t-shirt and a baseball cap, and he's sitting on the curb as if he's waiting for someone. It surprised me so much because I hadn't seen him when I looked, and I should have seen him. So when I passed him, I looked in my rearview mirror, but then there was no one. I pulled over and actually did a double take, and actually got out, and there was still no one there. Fairly sure he was a ghost. It was a Sunday, early afternoon. The family had gone to church, and I stayed at home as I'm an agnostic and hate church. I was sitting in my bedroom fiddling with something. I can't recall what I was doing exactly when out of the corner of my eye I saw a creature. That's the best thing I can describe it. It looked like a small demon. It ran across my room towards the door. This happened within a fraction of a second, but the fear that ran through my body was intense. I'm just getting chills now remembering it. I quickly ran down the stairs to the closet, grabbed a baseball bat, and sat on the couch in the living room while waiting for my family to return. When they did, I slid the bat under the couch and made no mention of the event to my family. The best description I can give the creature is the resemblance of the warlock imp in WoW. Very small, very fast. Bear in mind this was several years before WoW even existed. I'm just giving you an idea of what it was that I saw. Let me take you back 10 years or so. It's 2 in the morning. Not a breath of sound, and I sit at the dinner table under a single light bulb eating frosted flakes. I'm the only soul in the entire house. The family is gone, and the doors are all locked. I feel tired, but the cereal is delicious. When suddenly the light bulb flickers. Weird. That doesn't usually happen. Okay, back on, no problem. At least I can finish. That's when, not 4 feet away, the back door opens. Several things happened at that precise moment, and if you were able to capture it in slow motion, it would have looked like this. Milk and cereal splashing and scattering across the table. A spoon clinks on the floor. I have discovered the secret to human flight, and my body floats effortlessly 4 feet off the ground. My chair tumbles backward beneath me, but I give no heed. My mouth is open in horror, unable to make a noise. My eyes are locked on the door. The door! It swings open to the fullest amount, but all I see is this blackness outside. When my feet touch the ground, I sprint several feet backwards and catch my breath. The door frame is still empty. Nothing appears to have moved. I don't feel any wind and I can't hear anything. What the hell? After I gather my courage, I investigate. The door handle is locked, but it must not have clicked completely when it was shut. I figure the house must have had some pressure change somewhere. And, I don't know, suction did it. Yeah, that must be it. And the light bulb? It died, I think, a few days after. So, here's me hoping it was just random chance. I hope. I'm not sure if my mother's house is haunted. Nothing strange ever happened there except for one time. I was woken up in the middle of the night by what I thought was my little sister. No one had said anything or touched me in any way to wake me up, but there's that distinct feeling you get when you know there's someone there staring at you. You can feel their presence. Well, that is what woke me up. The presence of a little girl. It was pitch black, so I couldn't see a thing, but I could feel someone there, and it felt like it could be my little sister. But whoever was there was angry. The malevolent presence of a young girl. I asked quietly, "Maddie, what are you doing here?" I got no response, but felt that angry presence. I told myself I was imagining things, but I was paralyzed with fear by this point. It was very, very angry, and it felt pretty hefty. After a few minutes, I convinced myself that it had to be my younger sister, who was absolutely furious with me or perhaps sleepwalking, and I was working myself into a fit for no reason. Then, suddenly, I was struck in the crotch. Not too hard. I turned on the light, only to find no one was standing there, and the door was shut quite tightly. Utterly confused, I went to check on my mother and my sister. They were both sound asleep. I did not go back to sleep that night. That's the only strange thing that ever happened. I don't know if it was a ghost. It could have easily been my mind playing tricks on me, even making me believe I got punched, I suppose. But it always felt like a paranormal entity to me. I was at my grandma's house in Mexico. There's a demon my mum calls La Anima, which translates to a soul. The thing has been haunting my mum's family since they were small kids, and they said the house was built on an old graveyard from the early 1900s. As a kid, lots of things happened that traumatized me. But the one thing that has stuck with me is a nightmare I had about her. I dreamt I was walking in my grandma's house and no one was home. Even though I knew no one was home, I felt as though someone was watching me. As I get to the backyard, I see La Anima, who's dressed in all black, but as I approach her, I can see her face. She has yellow eyes that sink into blackness, a thin, narrow, pale nose, and her mouth was something else. Her teeth were razor sharp and her gums were bleeding. As she came closer, I knelt down and started praying with a rosary in hand. She starts to cackle, and it gets louder and louder, and at this point in my dream, I know I'm dreaming and I try to focus on praying, but I can't. She finally reaches me, kneels down in front of me, and continues to laugh. I stop praying. I look up at her, and she straight up says, "That's not going to help you," and continued laughing. I looked down at the rosary. It was gone. So was she. Fast forward to a few years later. My uncle and I were talking about La Anima, and he started talking about a nightmare he had. As he's talking, I realized we both had the same nightmare. It's crazy, but I never told anyone about that dream. I've never experienced anything paranormal myself, but my family has plenty of stories to share. This one took place sometime during the mid-1950s. My grandma came from a very poor family in Mexico. Her house was more like a shack, with a dirt floor. Every morning my great-grandmother would send her two eldest daughters, my grandma is the third-born, to go to the woods to collect water from the river to bring back so the family could use it for washing, drinking, or cooking. The second sister didn't tag along this particular morning, so it was up to the eldest sister to do the honor. The walk to the river was about 2 miles or so. She gets there and sees a long, black-haired girl playing with a stick, tapping it against the flowing water. The girl had her back to my grandma's sister. She didn't see too many people come to the area, so she tried striking up a conversation with the girl. The girl didn't answer her, or even turn her back to acknowledge her. My grandma's sister shrugs it off and approaches the river to collect the water. When she got closer, the girl turns away slowly to face my grandma's sister, and my grandma's sister immediately sees that the girl has no face, just skin replacing the eyes, the nose, and lips. She didn't really have a chin either, it was sort of just rounded off. Immediately my grandma's sister dropped the bucket and fled the scene, running the whole 2 miles, and she refused to ever do that chore again. In the first year we moved to our new house, our nanny said that someone was copying my older sister. She said that she saw my older sister sitting by her bed, but that my sister was still in school, so it was a bit kind of creepy. Here's my experience though. I saw my younger sister walk into our parents' room, and I assumed that she was going in there to use their bathroom, and me being the funny one in the family decided that I would scare her. So I walked stealthily and got inside the bathroom, then screamed so that she would be frightened. But no one was there. The second time that I saw my younger sister's doppelganger was when I was on my phone minding my own business, when all of a sudden in the corner of my eye, I saw the head of my younger sister pop out behind my bedroom door to see what I was doing. Of course, I ignored her, thinking that she was just being silly, but she did it again. Her head popped out behind the door, and I got annoyed, so I chased after her and thought that she went to my parents' room, but of course, no one was there. She had been downstairs the whole time, and I would have heard her go down the stairs. A little backstory. I was around 11 years old when my grandmother passed away. My parents both worked early in the morning, and she was the one who usually put my brother and I on the bus. We lived in the country, and so the bus came to our houses. I don't know why my brother wasn't home with me this particular morning, but I was getting on the bus myself. Anyway, I had gotten up and dressed and everything by myself with no problems and nothing weird. We lived in a 2-story farmhouse that was over a century old, and creaking sounds in the house were nothing out of the ordinary. But when I went downstairs, it felt different. I heard what sounded like heavy footsteps walking up and down the hallway stairs. I was trying to watch for the bus and figure out who else was home, when suddenly the footsteps started at the far end of the house and ran down the hall all the way to the stairwell, where a male voice called my name. It was familiar, but not anyone in my family. So I went to the foot of the stairs and walked about halfway up and turned to look at the top of the stairs, afraid of what I would see. And there was no one there, but the sound of footsteps running back up the hall, and the feeling that someone had just been standing there was enough for me to run outside and wait for the bus out there. I have plenty of other stories growing up in a mildly haunted house, but this was the only time that it ever spoke to me. The grandmother I referenced previously got a kitten when I was young, probably 5 or so. She was white with bright blue eyes and a black spot at the base of her tail. They called her Princess, and I loved her. After both my grandparents had passed away, as my grandpa passed less than 2 years after my grandma, we took care of her. We didn't move her out of their house because we were going to move in, and we were working on going through what was left in the house beforehand. It didn't make sense to move her if we were still going to be there every day. Fast forward to moving day, the night before my first day of school in 7th grade. My parents, brother and I all grabbed our pillows and blankets and went down the road to our new house to officially move in. I was the first one through the door and was uncomfortably greeted by the sight of Princess laying dead on the floor. It appeared that she had a heart attack mid-stride, and she landed perfectly on a small decorative pillow that, according to my mum, hadn't been there when she had been in the house earlier that afternoon. I was traumatized. I hadn't fully grieved for my grandparents, and now their cat, who I saw as a physical connection to them, was gone too. It was rough. Fast forward several years and I'm 16 now. My family didn't get another cat. My dad didn't like them, and we had 4 dogs at the time. I'm laying in bed one night trying to fall asleep, and I feel the daintiest footsteps on my bed. You must understand that I've slept with my bedroom door closed for my entire life, and the footsteps were too light to be any of our dogs, but they started by my feet and walked up next to my legs, and finally I felt what seemed to be a cat curled up and laying down right at my stomach. I didn't want to move because I didn't know what was going on, but after a while the weight seemed to just lift away. I didn't feel movement, it just got lighter, and when I looked down nothing was there. But I know that it was Princess coming to cuddle for a little while. That is the one and only time I've experienced anything like that, and I've never heard of anyone else having a similar experience. My dad passed away when I was finishing undergrad. My baby brother was in junior year of high school, and I was the executor of his estate. He didn't have a will, and brother was obviously a minor, so it made things difficult. So one night I go to this old bookstore called Vaughn's that he loved to get a quote for his Stephen King collection. While they're going through everything, I walk around. There's a basement chock full of books, and I walk down there, and there's no one else around. It must have been about 8:30 or so, and when I enter, a book falls off the shelf. Immediately, I feel a presence, but also this invisible sort of trail that I'm trying to follow. So I walk through the rows, thinking and just follow this trail until it leads to the sci-fi section. Here I get an overwhelming reassurance that my dad is in front of me. So I'm standing there and say to myself, okay, I'm open, receptive, let me hear. Forget the house. It blows me away. I've not even thought about the house of his that my brothers and I are trying to get baby bro through school in, so I have this little back and forth with myself about how I'm not going to quit and fight, yada yada. So I walk along and go to where the book fell, where I first entered the basement, and I pick it up. It's a book titled Teaching Your Children to Live Without You. That was it. It sent chills down my spine. I go upstairs, grab his books, say thank you and leave. When I get home, I open the mailbox and there's a letter from the bank demanding the full outstanding mortgage in 30 days. The sheriff came after the 30 days had elapsed and kicked my 17-year-old brother out, called him a low-down piece of crap, and then they sold it and made 130K, and it took me 3 years of being my own lawyer to sue the city to claim the estate equity in the property. One night I woke up to something settling over my face. Initially I thought it was my bed covers, but then I realized it all felt wrong and reached up and grabbed the cloth and threw it. I reached over to turn on my bedside light and froze because of what I saw. All of my clothes, which previously had been folded neatly in a basket, were now stacked atop of me, neck to toe. The piece of cloth that was setting over my face was a pair of my son's shorts, so of course I froze and listened for whoever was in my home. I stayed that way for about 10 minutes hearing nothing, so I got up and started to search the house. The only person that lived with me was my 8-year-old son, and I found him fast asleep in his top bunk. I know he didn't stack those clothes because the bunk he was in was metal and very squeaky, and he would have definitely made noise getting in or out. He's a pretty serious kid, and I've never known him to play tricks. In any case, I felt that last piece go over my face, so I know he wasn't there for that. I searched the entire house and no one was there but us. I believe it was poltergeist activity. Apparently stacking is typical of what poltergeists do. I also found a random puddle of water once in the middle of the living room when no one had been home. There was no place the water could have come from either. Very strange stuff. My name is Yvonne, and this is the first time I write about what happened to me when I was a child. I was about 9 years old. Allow me to tell you about my family history in order to best understand what I'm talking about. I am the youngest of a big Hispanic family of 12 children. During the early 1970s, my family and I were living in a small village in Chihuahua, Mexico, near the mountains, which made the woods our backyard. My father was a Japanese man who migrated to Mexico with a distant family friend. When he got there, he married my 13-year-old mother through an arranged marriage coordinated by my grandmother. My parents were both somewhat religious, but more than anything, superstitious. Their superstitious beliefs influenced all of mine. For the common symptoms of a cold and flu, it was always the same home remedies, such as herbs and teas, that we grew ourselves, or that we would just walk into the deep woods to collect. For upset tummies, it would be yerba buena or mint tea. If that didn't work, try epazote, a bitter root from a strange plant. It was 4 to 6 teaspoons of castor oil at least 3 times a week. You see, my mother believed that clean intestines equaled a healed body. Our family of 14 lived in a small shack, like a cabin, but less fancy, in the middle of nowhere. We had oil lamps, candles, and our giant wood-burning stove that my siblings and I would surround, especially during the winter season when the snow would basically block the only door we had. I saw plenty of unusual things out of our window that faced directly into the woods, but that is a story for another day. In my village there was a medicine man who we called El Sobador. The villagers would say this so-called medicine man charged extra pesos for his prayers, and 1 peso back then was of significant value, especially for a huge family like ours. The small village also had a lady who was referred to as La Partera. The lady assisted the pregnant women with the arrivals of their new bundles of joy. At present time, these special women are professionals and are now called midwives. My parents had unique beliefs. We had handmade dream catchers that we placed at the entrance of where we all slept. Every time it rained, we were supposed to take it outside the shack and gently shake the oversized, ugly, nightmare-infested dream catcher. The bad spirits would disappear in the rain, and the dream catcher was once again ready to catch our nightmares before they entered our dreams. My mother used to say that we were children, and that if we happened to die we would go straight to heaven, as long as we apologized to each other and said our prayers before going to bed. I still had bad dreams every now and then, so my mother insisted it was because of the dream catcher was nightmare infested. The time came when I got really sick, and when I saw her or it. Then I thought, this is it. I'm gonna go to heaven. For the first few days, I really enjoyed the wonderful care my mother was offering to me. I couldn't wait for her to arrive to feed me something yummy, as she carried my herbal tea on this big, round, bright red Coca-Cola tin tray. As the days passed by, I started to feel weaker, and when my mother held me close to her chest, she quietly wept. Her warm tears would fall on my face like drops of sorrow. She wanted to be strong, but her little girl was dying, and she had done everything humanly possible. It was out of her hands now. The end was nigh. Everything that my mother baked or cooked in her small kitchen, I no longer had any interest in eating, and her teas were now ineffective. The nearest city was many kilometers away, and we had no money to pay for a real doctor, and it would take days to make it to the city on horse and cart. The cool compressors my mother would put on my forehead felt like steam coming off my head. And then I saw it sitting there at the edge of my cot. But no one was allowed to sit on my cot. Who was it? More rather, what was it? I didn't recognize it. Certainly if the boys would see it, they would tell her that I wasn't supposed to have any visitors sit on my cot, only my mother. But she wasn't talking to my mother or me, or anyone for that matter. I was too weak to do anything, but I was curious, like 9-year-olds are. I had to force my eyes to stay open for a bit longer as I choked on my tears, and upon swallowing, felt a burning in my throat. The thing, or whatever it was, looked terrifying, and it was sitting by my feet. I couldn't even move my limbs, they were too weak. My voice was tired, and I just wanted to sleep. My mother heard me call her and immediately came up to my cot, but she didn't seem to understand what I was saying. I was pointing directly at it, but my mother didn't seem to hear me or see it. That thing was next to me night and day. It looked like a woman, but its back was turned away from me. She was wearing a long, raggedy black lace dress with a black veil that covered her face, head, and it just blended in with the rest of her. I asked when I had the strength, "¿Quién eres?" which means "who are you?" But my voice was just a whisper, and was very scared. I gasped and squeezed my eyes together, covering my head with my blanket, hoping that it was just a figment of my imagination. Once I opened my eyes, I thought the thing would be gone, but it was still there. I could now hear my mother crying very loudly, and my father was now measuring up my body's length, since he would be the one making my small coffin, which was typical for fathers in those days. I glanced at the deep sadness in his face. His already puffy eyelids and his bushy eyebrows could not hide how fretful he must have felt to have to be the one in charge of such a duty. But even he knew of my impending doom. My siblings circled my small bed, and the youngest boys begged, "Please don't go to heaven." I was scared. But as a child I had imagined that going to heaven would hurt. But my limp little body didn't hurt, and my tears didn't want to come out. Somehow I wanted to let my siblings know how much I loved them, and how much I would miss them. As I was watching my siblings weep loudly, my 9-year-old brain was concerned about our dream catcher, as I oversaw keeping it nightmare-free. I worried about how my siblings would be after I went to heaven. I was afraid they would forget to shake our oversized dream catcher and would have awful dreams as a result. We were dirt poor, and I wanted to tell them to share my last food rations with Mother, as she always was the last one who sat down at our freshly scented pine table that Father had made to accommodate our large family. I was having a difficult time not only speaking, but deciding who would keep my wood furniture my father had made for me. Days had passed, and my fear of not being able to see my family again just made it so much harder to breathe. My mother's soft prayers were scary to me, as if she was asking God to take her instead, and that I was a child who deserved to live. To think of her selfless love for me brings a tear to my eye. To know my mother was willing to die for me makes me love her even more. I heard a loud commotion among my parents. I wanted to know what the excitement was, but my own body was holding me captive. Then my 2 younger siblings said something along the lines of, A new medicine man has come to our village, and she's on her way to see you." That's when I felt hope inside. The new medicine man was a woman, and in my country, they're called curandera. My father was almost smiling, but I imagined that my unwanted visitor would get spooked with all the commotion. But it remained. What had appeared even closer to me and was still unmoving. I was examined by the curandera, and even though my family didn't believe in modern medicine, by now this beautiful, satin-skinned German doctor represented a big hope. I didn't understand what was happening. Had it all been a bad dream? Was I not going to heaven anymore? In my confused mental state, I thought if that horrific thing remained visible, then my death was imminent. I struggled with the heaviness of my little body to turn onto my right side from facing the paint-chipped wall. I watched the sun was shining its last rays through the heaviness of the trees surrounding our shack. The curtains on the windows were gently swaying with the light evening breeze. I didn't see the strange figure where it usually was by my feet. I shrieked, and finally had the strength to call for my mother. My mother came in and was so happy to hear my voice, and wanted to know why I was screaming. I welcomed her warm embrace. I told her about the dark figure in the shape of the woman. She smiled, and as she looked around, with her facial expression assured me that nothing was there. Mother told me that they almost lost me, but the curandera had saved my life. Apparently I had been devastatingly ill, bedbound for about a month. The modern medicine woman was giving me daily injections of pretty powerful medication. I had my 3rd dose, but how come I didn't remember the needle puncturing my skin? I was terrified of needles. My mother returned to the kitchen, and I felt so weak, but somehow I felt as if everything could have been a dream, maybe a delusion caused by my illness. I couldn't be sure. I glanced over, and it was still there at my feet. As usual, I froze, and I just hoped my bed would swallow me whole. I was still very small and very weak. It started to visit less. It was around the 5th day of the curandera coming to our shack to inject my medication. My parents would have to hold me down since the needle puncturing a hole in my skin wasn't anything I looked forward to. Then I glanced over to my feet, and it wasn't there anymore. I sat up in my bed and glanced at the window. It was there. This was the first time I had seen it standing, and even though now I had the strength to scream, I couldn't. I just sat there and stared as my tears were flooding my face. It was most definitely a female-shaped being, about 5 feet tall, and the slimmest female I'd ever seen. I could see more than before, but it had its back turned, peeking from the sides of her black veil, where I could see some long, thin, grey strands of hair. On its right side, an extremely bony right hand which appeared to be holding something like a staff. Its fingers were very long and grey, and it wasn't saying a word nor moving, just standing there looking out the window as the very last rays of sun had come from between the tall trees. The last day I saw it was when the beautiful German curandera came to check on me to give me the last injection. I could hear my siblings outside arguing with each other, and as I stood up from my bed to look out the window, and there it was, standing, facing me now, too far and not enough daylight to see its features, but close enough to know it wasn't human. Then my 9-year-old brain imagined that perhaps this unusual being lived in the woods. There, it was standing almost blending in with a massive tree trunk in our backyard. I couldn't believe my eyes when it raised its bony arm and waved at me, as it slowly blended into the darkness. It almost appeared to have walked backwards, blending into the tree trunk. I had too many questions, but now I was questioning my own sanity. How long has it been since it had rained? Was our dream catcher nightmare infested? How long had it been since I shook the nightmares in the rain? Maybe I had forgotten to do that. To this very day, I remain unsure. But I did get better, and I'm so grateful I recovered and never saw that entity again. I think I'm marked. Let me take you back to the beginning. I was born August 23rd, 1992. My mother had went into labour on the 21st, and the doctors delivered me at 8:08 a.m. weighing 8 pounds, just as Hurricane Andrew ravaged Florida. I had horrible night terrors as an infant child, and some of my earliest memories are of me waking up screaming and thrashing, with scratches and bruises all over my body, and seeing monsters when I closed my eyes. It stopped around the age of 8, and I almost forgot about it until I was 13, and my mother and I started photographing graveyards. That's when I started to hear voices and see spirits. I could get a sense of if we were welcome or unwelcome, and how powerful the entities were around me. This seemingly opened the floodgates of what I guessed are latent powers to when I started having strong premonitions of people and events around me. Then when I worked as a bouncer at some bars in Ohio, I met a strange man dressed like a Vietnam vet who bummed a smoke from me and told me some cryptic advice about, "Hello, Leo. When you go home tonight and lay your head down, ask yourself this: will you be standing against the dark at my side, or will you sacrifice others to save yourself?" I told him my name was Chris, and he just smiled and introduced himself as Dante, and then walked away despite me calling after him. I tried following him through the crowd, but he'd seemingly vanished, and no one else recalled seeing him. Then on another night, at a biker bar during a heavy metal show, a large man dressed like a biker with chains and rings and blue jeans and big black boots walked right up beside me and smiled and clasped a big, strong hand on my shoulder and bought me a shot of whiskey and a pint of beer, and laughed and drank with me, but didn't say much over the music. But I couldn't take my eyes off him because something about him being close to 6'7" and close to 300 pounds of muscle with long blonde matted hair and a scruffy beard with piercing blue eyes fascinated me. What caught my attention the most was on his hip hung a massive pistol with engravings down the side and a Trinity symbol on the hilt. I told him he couldn't have that in the bar, and he said, "No worries, Chris. I'm just enjoying the music and wanted to meet you in person. I'll be leaving now. Take care, and now I'll be watching. Remember, brother, ride the lightning." He walked outside, and I saw him hop on his motorcycle, and it roared like nothing I'd ever heard before, and he smiled and sped off into the distance. Right after that, and stopped working in bars, and was at a friend's house, who despite my protests started messing around with a Ouija board, and all the lights shattered in the house, and a shadowy figure appeared across the street, causing all the lights to flicker. There was then a blinding flash of light, and it was gone. Then suddenly my mind filled with a searing white light that told me it had taken it away someplace else, but I would have to be the one to send it back because I'm marked. I have dreams where I see a man dressed in a white suit with gold glasses, drinking what looks like molten gold from a glass in a magnificent parlor room, where he plays chess with a woman dressed in a grey pantsuit. I also have dreams and visions of battles and past memories, and of that biker riding through the desert, and a massive lightning storm at his back as he laughs, plunging into clouds of darkness, shouting about how it's a good day to die, and he will rejoice in Valhalla. And that is a brief summary of some of what I have encountered. I left out some stuff like how I was speaking to a woman who claimed to be the leader of an organization called the 100, and that her name was Beatrice, the Witch of the Mind, and all the stuff I saw with her. Anyway, if anyone knows something about what I've been speaking about, I would really appreciate some insight, as I have no idea about some of the goings-on in my life. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's collection of stories. It's always fun to enter the realm of spooky ghosts. Certainly one of my favorite topics. If you enjoyed tonight's video, please be sure to let me know in the very usual and customary way. A link can be found in the description, and I look forward to seeing and, well, what you guys thought about it. I'd like to extend a huge thanks also to my members and my patrons. You guys are invaluable to me, so thank you so much for joining. But for now, I think I'm going to leave things here. Don't forget you can watch more content, link on screen now, to more videos to, enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.